All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining our second webinar in our summer sustainability series leading up to the Feed Systems Sustainability Summit. I am super excited about this particular webinar on life cycle assessments and to hear from this amazing panel of experts on how they're leveraging the insights from these tools and using it to improve sustainability within their operations and supply chain. So before I turn it over to Lara to moderate, I just wanted to introduce myself quickly and then talk a little bit about our partnership with IFEEDER. So I'm Courtney Hall. I'm the Director of Sustainable Protein Systems and Feed at WWF US. And our team works with folks that have a stake in protein. So whether that's buyers and sellers of meat or those that feed or produce animals, we really work along the entire value chain to help understand the environmental impact of production, opportunities, and then collaborate on making improvements. So if you want to go to the next slide, Lara. We're super thrilled about our partnership with IFEEDER, and we've been working together for about 8 months now, and this partnership really came out of the Sustainable Ag Summit. So there is so much positive momentum in agriculture around sustainability that's really accelerated over the last three or 5 years. So there's tons of new announcements around commitments, lots of presentations by protein companies about sustainability, and feed tends to be mentioned, but it wasn't really taking center stage. And we really wanted to come together so that the feed sector and industry could take ownership over this topic and support sustainability within their own operations and support their customers on the demand side. And this initiative and partnership was also to support IFEEDER's sustainability roadmap as well. So we're launching our Feed Systems Sustainability Summit in September. And the whole purpose of this is to help support feed sustainability, whether that's advancing an ambitious vision or to catalyze action on critical components of sustainability in feed, like circularity, regenerative agriculture, responsible sourcing, and innovation. We also want to elevate learnings and best practices. So feed has been so critical in supporting animal protein production and doing more with less. And there's been so many impressive improvements. How can we share those learnings along the value chain? How can we share that information better? And how do we start to advance new initiatives that are needed to fill gaps? And so we're all coming together in September for a 2-day workshop and bringing value chain actors together collaboratively to advance this vision and goal. So we go to the next slide, Laura. I think this visual really does it best. Feed is uniquely positioned to lead on sustainability. It connects the grain side of agriculture with the animal agriculture side of agriculture. And there's already so many positive things happening in feed that we just don't know about. So we want to both elevate those stories, help the industry understand what feed is doing, and then bring us together to collaborate on new initiatives. Because I think it's very clear that in sustainability, we can't do this alone, and the feed sector can't do it alone. So go to the next slide, Laura. And then before I turn it over to Laura to kick off the webinar or the panel, I wanted to give a big thank you to our sponsors that are supporting the Feed Systems Sustainability Summit. We couldn't do this without you. So thank you to our summit host, Christian Hansen, to our showcasing sponsors, Bayer Innovation Center for US Dairy and Syngenta, and then supporting sponsors, BASF, Cargill, and Elanco. So I'm going to turn it over to Lara to moderate this awesome panel. We are going to have the chat open, so please feel free to input your questions in the chat, and we'll be moderating that as we go, and then have an open section for question and answers at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Courtney. And thank you all also for tuning in today. So my name is Lara Moody. I'm the Executive Director of IFEEDER, which is the Institute for Feed Education and Research, and we're really pleased to be working with World Wildlife Fund on this effort. Before I turn it over to our great panel, I first want to ensure that we are all starting from a basic definition of LCAs. And so LCAs, we're talking about life cycle assessments, and basically an LCA is a technique for assessing the environmental impact of a product over its life cycle. And these can be done sometimes to help understand the impacts of a product as a company may aim to prioritize improvements on products or processes, or it may be used to do something like compare between products for internal decision making. When you're setting up your life cycle assessment, you have to decide what you're going to focus on as your boundary and in the scope of the effort for the product or production system, and that has to be defined. So it could be that you're looking at a cradle to grave effort or a cradle to gate effort, they might say. You could be looking at a whole production system LCA, or you could be doing an LCA for a particular product. And I think also, as you'll hear today, that data sets matter as well. You might be doing something at a level where you're using secondary data or more genetic data, so maybe averages across some national data set, or you might be using more primary focus sources of information, which are much more specific to your operation. Also, a quick, what should a LCA be used for and what should they not be used for? So at a macro level, as we think about what LCAs are good at, they're good at making improvement decisions or considering your selection of materials or options for a specific process. If you're interested in identifying where you have potential for innovation within a product or production system, an LCA could be a benefit there. It could be valuable at benchmarking performance if you do more than one over a period of time and you're looking to see what types of improvements or changes you've made over that time period. Could be beneficial for marketing. It could be beneficial for engaging your stakeholders. Could be useful in strategic planning or helping to inform public policy. What LCAs should not be used for is looking at the differences between systems. And I think sometimes we hear this done at a high level where somebody's looking at the footprints linked to, pork versus beef or corn versus soy. And those really aren't fair uses of LCAs because of the data sets and the specificity of data that we can have as we use more, let's say, less generic data sets. They're also not a great tool for quantifying risk assessment. And so I just wanted to put those things out there. I think each of our panelists will reference points within this space as they do their presentations, but that's a place for us to start to ensure that everybody is on at least some basic understanding of what we're talking about relative to life cycle assessments. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. So we've got Martin Guthrie joining us from Darling Ingredients. He is the Corporate Director of Environmental Affairs. We are pleased to have Erica Lane, who can speak from a whole production system as she works as the Sustainability Manager from Iowa Select Farms, which is a pork operation in the Midwest. And then we have Tom Battagles joining us, and he's the Senior Manager of Global Strategy with BASF. So with that, Martin, if you want to come online, I will change the slide and turn it over to you.
Very good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction, Laura. Today, I'm going to kind of start by highlighting the primary strengths or purposes of LCA that Laura laid out, and then give examples of how Darling LCA work has met those purposes. And then I'll touch a little bit on the value that we've gained from that work, and kind of let you know what we've done. So, slide. Quickly, for those who don't know much about Darling, we kind of serve the ag and food industries by collecting low-value byproducts, converting those materials into valuable ingredients, primarily for the feed industry, but also for the food, fuel, and fertilizer industries. So we kind of try to find the best value for these low-value inputs. Slide. So let's get started, and you go ahead and there we go. One of the primary purposes of LCA is to support broad environmental assessments. So we kind of started that journey back in 2013 by sponsoring research done by Charles Gooding of Clemson University to develop an early LCA model for rendered products. This was kind of focused primarily on a comparison of the energy inputs and greenhouse gas outputs between rendering and composting operations, and that was done in an effort to inform and educate various stakeholders, including policymakers. More recently, we have contributed rendering data to be added to the GFLI database, both in Europe and here in the US, with the idea to both build the scope and the reliability of that data, improve the quality of the data. And you'll learn more about that GFLI in a bit from Tom. Next, and perhaps the most common way to use the LCA is to benchmark. This can cover anything from a process or a system down to a product. Gooding's initial work at Clemson coincided with the development of what I affectionately call the Gooding model. And that is simply a greenhouse gas calculator that provides a basic accounting of the mass of carbon sequestered within our raw materials, how much equivalent CO2 emissions that carbon would be, and then compares that with the actual greenhouse gas emissions from our operations, kind of our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And basically it provides a greenhouse gas avoidance number, which can, greenhouse gas avoidance can be kind of challenging, but the exercise really illustrates for us the huge amount of carbon that we capture and repurpose compared to the relatively small greenhouse gas footprint of rendering. And it's informed our story to a huge degree. Another example of benchmarking, in 2021, Darlene participated in a WWF-sponsored LCA that investigated food waste that's converted into different feed options, feed alternatives. The study provided a range of environmental impact assessments, basically comparing bakery byproduct meal, black soldier fly meal, as well as a chemically digested food waste. And by establishing these kind of benchmarks, it allows us to kind of understand the process and what the hot spots might be within that process. And then we can make decisions, on how to allocate resources to improve some of those hot spots. LCA is a great tool to try to identify gaps in our understanding of a process. All these examples that I'm talking about kind of do that. It informs our decision making and it enhances our knowledge. A specific example for Darlene was a study, again, on avoided greenhouse gas emissions, that we capture in our raw materials. But this analysis kind of went a little step further, utilizing system expansion to calculate comparative emissions. So all of the various options for our raw materials coming in, as well as the various products we produce, it kind of utilized comparative emissions to analyze all those together. And while that was a very informative process, it was also kind of complicated. And so be prepared for some complexity in these systems, because agricultural systems can be kind of complex. LCA can influence how we innovate and improve our products. So over the past several years, we've completed numerous carbon footprint studies of our finished products in Europe. And these are basic LCA studies that follow ISO 1467, that methodology. And they're done basically to provide a more detailed insight into the carbon footprint of these products going into animal feed, and to better understand where the carbon contribution came from and how can best devote resources to improve our carbon footprints. And as you can gather from all this, LCA helps to inform decision making. On some level, it does this within all the examples that I've mentioned. Slide. So what has been the value of LCA? My perception is that there's been very little historic LCA on rendered byproducts and used cooking oil. With a rise in the attention given to product and environmental aspects like carbon and water footprints, we now have the need to gather and update and improve the quality of that data to better tell our story and how we contribute to sustainability as well as circularity in the feed industry. We use these data to provide information. This has been happening for several years with our European operations because there's been demand by those customers who are seeking answers for things like, what is the absolute carbon footprint of our product? How does our product contribute to the carbon footprint of their specific products? How can the carbon footprint of their product be reduced by using an alternative ingredient with a lower carbon footprint? For me, the most valuable aspect is in the use of LCA to benchmark performance and then being a driver of that innovation by focusing on hotspots or opportunities. I'm told, and Tom will give us some more insight into this, but the future feed and food formulation strategy involves consideration of greenhouse gas footprint. So much like we currently formulate for protein, energy, and other nutrients, this may also be a part of the algorithm that determines what level and type of ingredients are used. And this is kind of, I think, what GFLI will ultimately inform. So to summarize, Darling occupies kind of a challenging spot in the food chain from an LCA standpoint, because we're dealing with the kind of nuance between co-products, waste products, byproducts, whether economic allocation or mass-based allocation should be used, whether we can use a system expansion and substitution. But despite that complexity, our philosophy has been that we need to lead the way, basically to better tell our sustainability story, and at the same time provide value back to our stakeholders. So it's always about the value. So, and that's my spiel. So back to you, Laura.
Hey, thanks so much, Martin, for those insights from Darling's perspective on their use of LCAs. So now, Erica, if you'll turn your camera on and turn your microphone on, we'll hear from Erica on her experiences with LCA at Iowa Select Farms. So take it away.
Thank you, Laura, for your introduction. As she mentioned, my name is Erica Lane, and I am the Sustainability Manager at Iowa Select Farms. Next slide, please. So who is Iowa Select Farms? We are a pig production company based primarily in Iowa. We are privately owned by Jeff and Deb Hansen, headquartered in Iowa Falls, Iowa, with another office in West Des Moines and 5 regional warehouses throughout the state. We are actually celebrating 30 years of being in production this year, and so it's been a great time to kick off our sustainability efforts as we look back on the past 30 years and how we've evolved around consumer demand and efficiencies throughout the production system, and how we're going to drive our business forward for the next 30 years. Iowa Select Farms has just over 242,000 sows and over 800 farms. We market on average 5.2 million hogs on an annual basis, making us the largest pork producer in Iowa and the 4th largest in the United States. Iowa Select Farms has a really unique and tight footprint as we raise all of our hogs here in Iowa, with the exception of one sow farm in Nebraska, as you can see on our map on the slides. And we have relationships with feed mills throughout the states. And on average, those feed mills only travel around 25 miles from the mill to our sites. And we also apply hog manure within a 5-mile radius of all of our sites. And so we believe we have a large confidence that a lot of our manure acres are overlapping with our feed acres. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly talk about our LCA journey. I started my career here at Iowa Select 5 years ago as a gilt selection specialist in Southern Iowa. And then I transferred into an environmental role overseeing manure application and managing our manure management plans. In this past summer, we saw an opportunity to start our sustainability program, and that's where my position came about last year. So I've been in this role now for just a little over a year. And we truly view sustainability as a holistic approach. So really taking care of our people, our animals, our environment, and our communities. but we know what's important to our customers and to consumers and throughout the supply chain, that we needed to have a better understanding of our greenhouse gas footprint on the product that we produce. And so we were able to work with Sustainable Environmental Consultants, which is a third-party company based here in Des Moines, to complete our first LCA last year with our 2020 data set. And from that LCA, we were able to see the breakdown of where all of our emissions are coming from. And our biggest contributor was through our feed at roughly 55%. And not only was our feed our biggest contributor, it was also the biggest opportunity for us to reduce our footprint overall. Next slide, please. So here are some of the learnings that we have gathered through our first experience getting an LCA completed on our product. There truly is value on accurate data. And I believe that this is true through our feed system, but also through our entire business. We've actually started new initiatives here at Iowa Select to better understand and how do we get more accurate data throughout our entire business. SEC actually had to use national averages on how Iowa corn and soybeans were produced and grown. And to our experience, that is not a good representation of how we produce feed here in Iowa. And so to us, that's not good enough. And we know that we could potentially reduce our emissions through true data, or like Laura had mentioned, primary sources. And we can reduce that by roughly 40% by just gathering that information. And so questions that we have is, how do we get that real primary source data? How can we make that data transaction throughout our supply chain? And how, as Iowa Select, as a producer in Iowa, how can we connect our manure acres through our feed acres? So I'm really excited to continue to learn with you all throughout this summit series during the summer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erica, for your insights into some of the challenges, not only your learnings, but some of the challenges that you have in evaluating and moving forward to further refine your LCA. So now, Tom, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to you to give us some insights from your position, not only with BASF, but also your position as the lead, the chair of the technical committee for the Global Feed Lifecycle Assessment Institute. So take it away.
Thanks, Laura. So yeah, I'm going to give a pretty quick overview of how we can begin to address some of the issues that Martin and Erica just rightly outlined in terms of some of the gaps that we have, and looking towards the future. How can we begin to scale some of the LCA opportunities going forward? Next slide, please. And so, yeah, you can click, I think, 5 times. Sorry. So I just want to begin by painting a picture that we're on a journey, and I think that's been realized from the last discussions, and we're kind of in the early to mid stages of this journey. The first point of this journey is assuring that we have a harmonized methodology in order to create kind of credible and consistent life cycle studies. We have this already over the past few years. The UN FAO has the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Guidelines, otherwise known as LEAP, that have been established for animal feed and animal protein value chains. The European Commission also has, from a policy level, the product environmental footprint rules for feed as well. And so with that methodology established, the next logical stop is, how do we get the data, as has been called out already a few times now. And from our perspective, we see the Global Feed LCA Institute, or GFLI, being that stop for reliable and consistent data. And I'll give some more insights on that shortly. From there, the journey continues from data. How do we begin to assemble tools and interconnect those tools to have really a dynamic approach, a much more efficient approach in terms of life cycle assessment and seamless integration that ultimately leads towards more and more integration, and ultimately an ecosystem that provides a digitally integrated value chain with proven primary data flows. Next slide, please. And so stepping back to the data side, because that's kind of where we are in this journey, the Global Feed LCA Institute was established a couple of years back as an independent animal nutrition and food industry nonprofit. And the core mission for GFLI is to provide a publicly available database for life cycle insights for the global feed industry. And when I say global, this means not just global data or global average data, but also at a country level, at a state level, for instance, when you look at the US, and begin to get more and more granular. The GFLI is industry supported and member driven. And the status of GFLI right now in terms of the scope of the database that's available is that we have more than 1,000 data sets that have been put together at country, state, and region level for a lot of the key ingredients within animal nutrition. The focus of GFLI is not just on carbon footprint, and that's one important aspect to take away here from the LCA side, is that LCA is really designed to understand the trade-offs and not just focus in on one environmental impact category. There's a lot of looking around the world, there's a lot of situations with drought currently. So if you're in a region where there's drought, carbon molecules aren't too much of a consideration if there's not adequate water. So that's just an example. The GFLI provides data on water, on eutrophication from excess nitrogen and phosphorus, land use, and other key metrics. The GFLI data are externally reviewed to assure that they are implemented in the database in a consistent way with the GFLI methodology. That is also in alignment with the FAO LEAP guidelines that I mentioned in terms of that harmonized LCA approach. In terms of the scope of what GFLI is offering in terms of the regions included currently, the initial data came from the EU, US, and Canadian regions for the most part. There is some market data for other regions as well that come from market averages. But really the target for GFLI going forward is to have this data available on a global basis, and covering better and higher quality data across all regions. And the Brazil region is one example of, let's say, the next countries looking to supply data into the GFLI database. I would encourage all of you, if you're not already familiar with GFLI, to check out the website there in the bottom right-hand corner for some more details. You can also download the database there for your use, and reach out to the Secretariat there at that email address if you have interest in becoming a member. As I mentioned, it is industry supported and member driven. The initial members were the feed industry groups, AFIA, IFIF, and so forth. And it's just been within the past 1-2 years that GFLI has opened up to corporate membership as well. Next slide, please. And so going from the data side then to the next step in the journey, looking at tools and interconnected systems. And I want to paint the picture that we are in the early days of this, but there are opportunities now in terms of these tools and interconnectivity. And I'm using here an example from the BASF animal nutrition side called Optinix that we've introduced, that most of you are probably familiar with. The concept of least cost formulation. That's the average practice globally that focuses on meeting not only the nutritional requirements, but the cost requirements, and assessing and optimizing on the cost of the commodities that go into animal nutrition. And what we've done with Optinix is to integrate the life cycle sustainability aspects alongside of the cost of nutrition and actually interconnect with feed formulation systems, giving this opportunity to essentially have life cycle aspects available at the nutritionist and the formulator's fingertips, which is really critical because 50 to 80% of the environmental impact of meat, milk, and eggs is coming from the animal feed. So at the end of the day, in order to operationalize a lot of these targets, we really have to, put it in the hands of those at an operational level here that can impact the chain. The focus of Optinix is not just on the formulation, but just as importantly on the live production on farm, including the manure excretion. So that's an example of interconnectivity now. And if you go to the next slide, looking out more to the mid and long term, is the creation, the drive really as an industry in a collaborative and partnership-driven approach towards a digitally integrated value chain or a farm-to-fork ecosystem. And so ultimately, the drive here, there's been this mention a few times now of primary data, looking for more and more primary data. And that's definitely the future that we see going forward, so that the consumer at one point in the future can, at the retail level, essentially make a purchasing decision based on the exact footprint of the meat, milk, or eggs that they're looking at. You can imagine on feed crop side, for example, irrigation data being automatically sent to the John Deere tractor, which is available today, but then being connected ultimately to the transparency and traceability systems, so that the animals and the diets that they're consuming, we have exact understanding of what the impacts are from each of those ingredients, leading up to that retail point and giving that primary footprint capability. So that's a few years out for sure, but the partnerships and collaborations on this to start working forward are happening now across the industry. We're looking forward to continue to be a part of this, and at this point, I'll pass it back to Laura for the Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. So I'm going to actually take this screen down and stop sharing, and at the same time ask for Tom, you to stay on, Erica, for you to turn your camera and microphone back on, and Martin, for you to join us again as well, so that we can all see ourselves on this screen. Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your insights there. I see a few questions that have come in. I would encourage others to drop some more questions into the chat. While you're doing that, I'm going to start with a question that I'm intrigued by, which is for each of your companies that are both working in, that are all working in the LCA, doing LCAs. What's the impact of LCAs on your own, organization's business strategies? And I guess I would roll into that the linkage of those business strategies to your broader ESG or environmental social governance goals and plans that you have underway. Martin, you want to start? Sure,
that's a great question. I have a couple thoughts. Kind of from a micro viewpoint, to do good LCA, I think you need to divide the systems into smaller unit processes, and traditionally for rendering that has been, what's your total energy, what's your total pounds, and you come up with a number, but not much granularity in that. So I think LCA helps to inform our ability to obtain better data. And more useful data. Kind of at the macro level, we're doing the same thing we've been doing forever. So we like to say that we were green before green was cool. But LCA for us helps to inform kind of our business strategy and help us focus on kind of enhancing our sustainability advantage, because we think we do have a great sustainability story. We just never have told it very well. So trying to take advantage of that.
Great. Erica, thoughts from your perspective?
Yes, Laura, thank you for that question. Here at Iowa Select Farms, as I mentioned in my presentation, we're celebrating 30 years of being in production. And so to us, sustainability is our business plan, and we want to ensure we improve efficiencies for the next 30 years so that we can continue to produce pork here in the state of Iowa. And so having an LCA completed on the product that we produce has opened up new opportunities to collect and look at better accurate data through our feed system, but through other systems as well within our business, such as water usage, energy usage, and to identify where can we positively impact our environment, but also make sure that it's aligned with our business plan as well.
And Tom?
Yeah, from the BASF side, I think, BASF has, is a bit maybe more in a unique position, I think, in terms of LCA, that there's probably decades of experience within BASF on this topic. And I think ultimately it's being used to drive at a product level, but that gets ultimately rolled up to the enterprise level. You know, we're all setting corporate goals, including BASF, but a lot of organizations haven't yet realized, you know, how to achieve those goals. And ultimately, a footprint is made up of every product that's produced. So without, you know, really assessing at a product level, life cycle perspective, you're never going to really achieve the innovations necessary that then connects with that, you know, the enterprise level. And that's really, you know, where we're looking to continue to go from the BASF side.
So Tom, I've got a question that I think ties in well to some questions that are in the chat from both Nicoletta and David. And so the question that I'm going to ask is, how does GFLI plan to grow its database and integrate higher quality data for the future? And I think that wraps into the question that both of them are getting at, which is, are you going to get down to farm level data? And how do we get more granular, and kind of what level of data is in there now?
Yeah, no, it's a fair and great question, an important question. So GFLI, there's a few ways that GFLI data will grow for the future. I mentioned already this target of having really all regional data, all regions covered in GFLI. So that's one aspect. For example, with the Brazil region coming in next, the next aspect is really around the topic of getting more coverage, full coverage on the ingredient types. So for those that are familiar with GFLI, one of the glaring gaps, let's say, is on the feed additives or micro ingredients space. GFLI has mainly been focused on the macro ingredients. Of course, that's where the big opportunities are. But it's just been within the past year or so that GFLI has put together a methodology for feed additives and LCA that also aligns with the LEAP guidelines. And so that's one space. There's a working group that's just started up within GFLI now, and also linked with IFIF and FAFAC, that is looking at how to drive strategies for feed additives coming into GFLI. Martin talked about byproducts. That's another area that GFLI, so byproducts and alternative types ingredients that are having sustainability claims, need appropriate data to prove out those claims. So that's another area of focus for the future. And when it comes to getting more granular and down to, let's say, primary data insights, we've initiated a pilot project on branded data. So that could be a certified macro ingredient. It could be a feed additive that one has branded that is backed up by substantial primary data. It won't have 100% primary data for the entire supply chain at this time, just given the nature of where the industry is. But the idea there is to start to drive more granular, more primary data going forward. That is a pilot project because of the aspect of needing to achieve consistency in the data that is provided to GFLI in order to back up appropriate market claims that may be made on those aspects.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So Erica, a question for you about the feed mills you all engage with. So if you've got feed mills that are within about 25 miles of many of your facilities, then that means you've got a lot of feed mills out there that you're working with. And so what are the challenges you have in working with those feed mills, and what kind of conversations are you having with your feed mills as a partner in your sustainability efforts?
Yes, thanks, Laura, for that question. So we work with 13 feed mills throughout the state of Iowa. Like I mentioned, kind of where the heavy parts of our production are located. And we've had brief conversations with a few of our feed mills. We believe that the data potentially is there through different avenues throughout the producers that they work with. But it's going to vary through different feed mills and feed mill owners. But we understand, you know, where they're sitting at as well. And we hope to bring them to the table so they better understand truly the value of the data that they potentially have holding or stored throughout their system, and being able to provide that throughout the supply chain.
And just a follow up, Erica, that gets a little bit more into the question that Nicoletta asked, which is relative to the digital maturity, I think, which kind of speaks to a little bit the ease of the potential ease of data flow. Is that similar within all of the feed mills you work with, or is there a variation? And where do you think that is relative to your opportunities?
Yeah, I think that obviously digital maturity, we believe that there's a lot of farmers out there that use different platforms on how they collect their data, in-field data, boundary maps, yield maps. I'm married to a farmer and we use a couple of different systems, right? And so how do we tie all of that data together and to put it into a system that we can use throughout the supply chain is a great question. We don't have a ton of insight on what those feed mills are specifically advocating for to their producers on what digital platform to use. And we're still at the initial conversations as we continue to learn more. How do we get more transparency through the data collection as well?
A question for all of you, leave it to Matt to ask a challenging question, which is, do you guys have examples, do each of you have examples of how you assess the quality of your data that you're using, and how do you determine how good it is or how bad it is in your LCA assessments? Anybody want to volunteer to take that one on?
That Matt. I'll start. From our perspective, old school rendering just had a power meter at the fence, and that was about it. And so as we kind of make these unit processes a little bit smaller, that also requires to get more granularity on where that energy is used, and it just helps us divide up those processes within the facility, basically. So I would call that, that process of increasing water flow meters and increasing energy, measurements throughout the facility as an improvement in data. It's all kind of primary data, but you're just getting more granularity, and so that's kind of what I'm shooting for when I talk about improved data.
Other thoughts? Yeah, great. Go ahead, Erica.
I can try to answer next. Sorry, Laura, to interrupt you. For us at Iowa Select, we have some processes still in place where we are relying on employees to track data, and we know that there's always going to be a human error element in tracking that information. And so we're looking at ways to be more efficient with that data collection through technology.
Yeah, and from our side, I think that it seems to be a common theme. The technology, I see a couple of points about interoperability of systems, and that's one of the things that we've done a lot of work on at BASF with our own production systems to enhance the quality and, let's say, ongoing monitoring, real-time monitoring of production data. The challenge continues to be, of course, on the supply chain side, and to Matt's question there about the quality of the data. And I think it's, whether it's GFLI or LCA in general, the questions around the timeliness of the data, the geographical representation of the data, and the technology, making sure, those three aspects are at least as close as possible and highest quality as possible, give us the stimulus to be able to use the data if we do that in a study.
So Tom and Martin, this question, I might toss it out to one of you all. So Carlos has asked if the European Union product environmental footprint category rules are generally the same standard or set of information that's used within the US methodologies. Anybody want to take on that one?
That's up, Tom. You better answer that. I can't tell you what we're using here, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean the short answer, at least to my knowledge, is that there's no, let's say, universal industry methodology for the US. I mean, you have, as I put up on the one slide there, from a global perspective, I would suggest that the FAO LEAP guidelines are really what's been established, irrespective of region in terms of life cycle assessment. Yes, Europe has its product category rule for feed, but really the FAO guidelines drive that global picture, including for the US. And if somebody has knowledge of another US standard, please put it in the chat there.
So, general question, I think that I think is a good one that Courtney asked, and I think this applies probably. I'm going to ask it relative to Erica and Martin as well, even though the question is focused at Tom. There's two parts to the question. How do the LCA support your goal setting process? And the second one is, considering your experience in the topic, what trends are you seeing for demand of this type of data? And as I read that piece of the question, I'm thinking about, are your stakeholders asking for it? Like, what's driving you to do this other than your internal effort? Are there other people downstream or upstream that are asking you for this information? So Erica, I'll let you start.
Yes, thank you, Courtney, for those questions. So I'm going to reread your first one here. How do these LCA support your goal setting and process? So we, like I mentioned, we truly view sustainability as a holistic approach, but we know looking at what our customers are looking at, we want to make sure that we're in alignment throughout our supply chain. And so we understood and we've heard, that feed was a huge impact on pork production, but we really wanted to understand what that looked like for our internal production. And so that almost provided us more confidence of what direction to move forward with. And like I mentioned, we have a great unique opportunity to potentially view our manure acres and overlap that with our feed acres, since manure has a great impact on LCA and our overall footprint. And so long term, that's something that we would potentially look forward to. And then your next question was, considering your experience, what trends are you seeing for demands for this topic of data with others? As far as stakeholders, Iowa Select Farms is really customer driven, and we have evolved through customer and consumer demands throughout the last 30 years. And we know that this isn't going away. And so we want to continue to move forward with this. And personally, like I mentioned, I'm married to a farmer in Southern Iowa, and we also get hog manure on our ground as well, and we implement rye cover crops and do reduce tillage and no-till practices on our farms, because A, it's the right thing to do, and B, it improves soil health, and so ultimately helping the farmers to become more profitable.
Thanks. Martin?
So we see kind of maybe a big difference between what's going on in the US versus what's going on in Europe, and you kind of gather that from what I've said earlier. I think we're just now starting to see demand for this kind of data down our supply chain to the final manufacturers. In Europe, it's been going on for quite a while, and in fact, the LCA has been used as a tool to set goals there, in the sense that what informs our goals, to reduce water and to reduce energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions, and we've got LCAs year over year to kind of demonstrate that, and the ultimate customers over there have really kind of latched onto that, and I think view us as kind of a leader in demonstration of improvement in that regard. So that's kind of how you've used it there. I think we're on the verge of seeing more demand for it here, but it hasn't caught on quite as much as it has in Europe. So.
And Tom, since the question was originally addressed to you, I'll let you round out the conversation before we close out the webinar.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what Erica and Martin just said. It's definitely, in terms of demand, it's definitely from a regional perspective here and now in Europe, with many customers, stakeholders already actively using LCA as an approach for communicating and for tracking. The U.S. is I think coming on quickly, more from a market-driven perspective, as opposed to, of course you have the market in Europe as well, but a policy-driven perspective, I think, has really been the push in from the European Union region. And I think in terms of, you know, the question around our goal setting in BSF, again, it goes to that automated process, a data collection process and so forth. And, you know, having that as the foundation for our enterprise strategy. And that goes, the data ultimately is getting passed along, you know, for innovation, for driving new technologies within BASF, and also for responding to stakeholders that are asking about our product footprint and having that data available.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for your and Erica for your participation and time on the panel today. I want to just take one more opportunity to thank you as panelists, but also to again thank our sponsors. They have been key to us being able to do not only these webinars, but the summit coming up in September. With that, I also just want to let you guys know about the third and final webinar, which I think is going to be really interesting. So Courtney will be again joining us to moderate the webinar, and the title is Feeding Future Sustainable Protein Systems. And what we've done is invited several of the roundtable and animal, livestock, and poultry sectors to join us. And as many of you know, they have currently been putting forth their goals and targets and strategies to introduce their sustainability efforts, and we're going to hear from them about how feed is relevant to those goals and targets and where they see feed fitting in. So join us on Thursday, September 15th at 2 p.m. You can go to the Feed System Sustainability Summit webpage, and there is a place for you to go ahead and register for that third webinar. Thanks so much. We will be making the slides available to the participants and registrants in the webinar. And like last time, we will shortly be sending out the recording as well as creating a highlights version for you all to use. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to connecting with you next time. Bye.